device. And then reminder, we are recording to everyone. So if you need anonymization steps, take those as we spoke before the session. All yours, Jenny and Chris.
All right. Hello, everyone. Everyone who's here with us right now and anyone joining us online after. I am going to start with just a little bit of housekeeping and then I'll introduce myself, I promise, although you all know me. I'm dropping in the chat again, I think for David particularly, the link that we're going to use. Chris and I tend not to use slides. We tend to use a blog post instead. So we're going to share that and use that today. And we'll introduce you a bit to how we work. For anyone who hasn't met me before, I'm Jennie Blake and I work at the University of Manchester in the UK. I've been interested in things like preservation and social justice and teaching via perhaps unique and different perspectives, though, since I started teaching more than 20 years ago. And I'll hand over to Chris so he can introduce himself.
Thank you, Jenny. So hi, everyone. Nice to meet many of you. I am Chris Millson. I also work at the University of Manchester in the UK. In the library, and I work in e-learning, and similarly to Jenny, very interested in kind of open education, openness in general, preservation, and in my case, particularly web archiving. So we've got an exciting session ahead, and I'm just going to share my screen and get us started. So as Jenny has already mentioned, instead of slides, we have a blog post, and the link is in the chat. So I will share my screen, but we've designed this post for asynchronous engagement. So you can follow along now with us. Hopefully you can see that. But you can access it after the session anytime and engage in your own way, in your own time. So if you're not able to engage fully with all the activities, then just join in the discussion or listen, and you can access afterwards. So hopefully you've all got the link. So we start with an overview of the session. So we're going to look at preservation. In this session, we're focusing on web preservation. We're going to ask a few questions about what that might mean. We're then going to have an opportunity to try preservation for those of you who are able to do that. We're then going to point to some resources we've already made linking preservation to teaching practice. We're then going to go into some of our own ideas around preservation as voice. And then we're going to finish off with our thoughts on preservation as resistance. So the first section, I'm just glancing across to my schedule on my other screen. Preservation as a verb, a constant choice. So what do we have here? We have pickles. Okay, so that's our first pun. Jenny warned that there would be puns. When something is preserved, it might be preserved by a library or a museum or an archive or a government, and they get to choose what is preserved. So if we look at the Merriam-Webster definition of preservation, the act, process, or result of preserving something, such as keeping something valued alive, intact, or free from damage or decay. But who attaches that value? Who decides what is valued? If you know how to pickle and have some jars, then you can choose what to preserve. So we are going to use some of the time in this session to introduce the process of web archiving. And some of you may have done it before, some of you may have opportunity in this session to do it. We'd encourage all of you after the session to try it. But before that, we're just going to kind of think about what we mean by preservation. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to look through, if you're able to, section 1 of the post, have a read, have a click around, and then we've got a contribute section. So I'll just demo this now. where you can add your thoughts. So we have various ways for you to engage with this. If you click on access the comment stream, you'll see this stream where you can anonymously add your comments in response to our prompts. Now, the aim of this is to make the session work asynchronously first and foremost. So if you're able to add your comments and responses to the comment stream, then please do. And that way, we will be able to look at your comments in the session, but others will also be able to see them and add to them afterwards and contribute. So we can have a discussion in the room, but let's also try, if we can, to add some to the comment stream, and then we can look at those afterwards. So about 5 minutes for this.
And Chris, I think what you want people to consider or reconsider is that idea of preservation, right? So that's what they're commenting on first. So what he's been showing is that blog post behind him, and then on it is that in the first section are your thoughts on preservation. And what we wanted to start with is this idea about what it might mean to preserve, who gets to preserve, those things that we talk about sort of tangentially a lot of the times in education, especially around equity and social justice, but where perhaps we might be leaving it or being reactive to others doing the preserving as opposed to taking action ourselves. So we'd like you to take a moment if you can. I think we're small enough to stay in here. So if you'd like to have a chat, you can just unmute and join us. But otherwise, either drop something in the chat, the text chat, yes, or go ahead and use the comment stream and go ahead and add to the post for us. Does that work, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I'll pause up for the 5 minutes as well,
Yes,
so
please.
the recording viewers later won't stare at 5 minutes of likely us reading the blog. Lovely. There we go.
So, hello everybody. Welcome back after that activity. So what you did there was you went through the top part of the blog post, and then you had a look at what you might think about preservation. And some of you were kind enough to leave us some comments in the chat as well, in our commenting stream, not in the chat as well. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and read through those. They are all anonymous, as are all entries into this tool that we have. So people have said, preservation is the gateway to openness. Someone else has said, I do indeed agree that we do have some power, and also agree that enough to have an impact on preservation of what we decide to and can preserve. I also think we must be careful about perhaps unintended effects of preserving what others involved may not want preserved. And we are literally going to touch on that later. Many of us, again, are most familiar with models of preservation based on fixed culture stored in centralized repositories and institutions. How might community-based preservation and recreation offer modes of perseverance that are more resilient and responsive to the values of a diverse population? And then we have, for me, preserving is a chance to highlight something I'm afraid might be lost or missed or even deleted. At the same time, it's a chance to share something joyful with others, sometimes others far into the future. People have added, my husband keeps trying to convince me that our pickled stuff in the fridge is expired. And I keep saying, but they're preserved. Preservation as not waste, also preserving our values and self-preservation. And then finally, we have many ways to digitize information now. So the challenge is not with digitization technology, but instead with the dissemination of what we preserve. Although libraries and museums remain powerful filters for what we digitize, we have many more options for disseminating what we preserve now. And it's really interesting because all of these things in some way often touch on this idea that preservation is about, in some cases, freezing something, right? So making it continue to exist in the form that it was already into perpetuity, or at least into the future of some kind. And what Chris and I are going to try and assert is that is absolutely the core, of course, of this concept. But that what we want us to think about is what it means to have something that is preserved if you look at preservation as an active act, right? So it's not digitize something, stick it somewhere, leave it. It's in fact the active decision and the active assertion that something is worth preserving, but within a new context or a new discussion. So what we're going to do now is, first of all, we'd like to invite anyone to add anything that you've been thinking about. So first of all, we're all really enjoying Alex Gill's quote, which is really nice. But while you were thinking or going through the comment stream, was there something that anyone wanted to add or something that they want to chip in with before we move on? Otherwise, we will keep you busy. Also, I am counting to 10 in my head because my first impulse is just to keep talking until someone interrupts, just to let you all know. So what we're going to do now is we're thinking about preservation as resistance. So at its core, it is this idea of securing something for the future. But if you stop with the act of almost photocopying or the act of making something static, we're not sure, Chris and I, that that is actually the full sort of embodiment of what you might do to preserve something. So what we wanted to do is two things. First of all, we wanted you to think about how you might preserve now and what that means. And so what we're going to look at now, and Chris is going to lead you through because he is the absolute expert in this. Hi, Beatrice. He is the absolute expert in this, is a self-led activity about archives and archiving digital materials. So Chris, do you want to go ahead and take that away?
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can share without all of the bars in the way. Let me try and get rid of them. Hide video panel. Hide floating controls. Is that better?
Nope.
Okay.
There it is. Perfect. Oh, it's
Oh,
that
is
one
that-
in the middle though. But that's oh, beautiful.
Is that okay?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to look at something preserved. We're going to open a pickle jar, and then we're going to preserve something ourselves. We're going to pickle something. So we thought about preservation. We're going to do it. So we have an activity here which we developed previously, and there are some educator notes there for anyone who might consider embedding it in other sessions, in which we will browse an archived web page using the Wayback Machine, which is an internet archive, and we will then archive something ourselves. Now, those of you who are not able to do this at the moment for whatever reason, you can come back and do it later, and we'll have some discussion in the main room around it. But if you have a look at section 2 in the blog post and follow through the instructions, I can quickly demonstrate it now. Use the Wayback Machine. And search for the URL of a web page. So we can put one of Jenny's favors in. You may have used this tool before, you may not have. You can put in a link, and if someone has archived it in the past, you can go through the calendar of when people have archived it and see what it looked like in 2007 in this case. Now it's quite slow, but it's free and it does the job. So we'll see how long this takes to load. I will stop sharing my screen for now and we can bring it back on when it loads up. But in the meantime, we'll spend about 7 minutes, try and use the Wayback Machine linked from the blog to look at a web page as it appeared in the past, and just say in the chat if you have any issues. Oh, it's loaded. I'm going to reshare my screen. The Wayback Machine is very minimal computing. It runs on old hardware in an old church in San Francisco, I believe. So this is what Eric looked like in 2007. And you can go through and see what it looks like now on the live site or on an archived copy of it. So have a look at a website of your choice and think about what that archive kind of tells you and how you might engage with that.
So we'll just take a little bit of time. And the idea here is to look at something that may not exist anymore. It may have changed, right? It in fact is sort of doing something slightly different. You can use the links inside the browser Or if you're on your phone or something, it's easier. You can definitely find the Wayback Machine and just have a little look. It's easiest if you have a web page that you visit a lot, you know, that you can kind of pull to mind. But otherwise, just you can do a quick kind of search as well. And we'll come back in, what is it, about 5 minutes now, Chris? Yeah, and just discuss what we thought about it. We hope you have all had a chance, wherever you are, to look at something of the old web and think about how it might have changed. One thing that is worth noting, and that came up in the chat, is how this can be a sort of an active thing you do. You can put things in the Wayback Machine. It can be something you go to look for things, but it's perhaps something that we're not deliberate enough about. So one of the reasons, Chris, and I wanted you to have a look was that there's that idea that we kind of let it happen, or we cede agency over preservation to other bodies. And we'd really like anyone walking away from the session or walking away from using our blog post to thinking a little bit differently about that act of preservation. And now we have the next bit of the activity, don't we, Chris?
Yeah. So thank you, Jenny. No, we did not hear screeching cicadas. The background noise suppression on Zoom is weirdly good. I have once in a Zoom with a colleague, one of us burst into song for some reason, and it completely suppressed it because it decided this is not voice, this is music in the background, let's suppress it. But the song was important. Okay, so we're now going to try and archive something for ourselves. Okay, so we're just going to spend a few minutes again, if we're able to. If you're in the woods, your mileage may vary, although the Wayback Machine works about as well on mobile as it does on desktop. Yes, absolutely, Maha. So we have purposefully archived some of our public course materials so that others can find them in future. Spoiler alert, others is often us. Great stuff. So we can now have a go. If you have a look in the next part of the activity, if I just reshare my screen and hide all of this gubbins, have a look in the next part, choose either the same website or something else that you think others might like to look back on. So you've looked back at how something appears in the past, and we've commented on the accessibility or lack thereof in the past. Now think about something today. Might we look back at it and think, you know what, that's not very accessible, or that's not very something else? Think about a website or a web page that others might like to look back on in future, and use the Save Page Now function in the Wayback Machine to archive it. So you scroll down a bit on the same page, paste the link into here, and click Save Page. And it will it might take a minute or so, but it will add it to the archive of pages for people to find in future. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. There are more advanced things. So yeah, when you search for something like Jenny said, searching for old book reviews she'd done, and some of them had disappeared. Everything you found is only there because someone archived it in the first place. Now, some of that is automated, some of that is semi-automated, but ultimately, if you want to know that something is archived for the future, then the only way is to check if it's already there and then do it yourself. Yeah. If anyone's interested in highly automating things with the Wayback Machine, I've done a lot of it in my web archiving hobbies. It's possible, you know, to give it a spreadsheet. It's possible to automate things. So yeah, it can save subpages, Maha. When you archive something, if you're logged in, so you have to create a free Internet Archive account or use a Google account. You get an extra tick box that says save outlinks, and that will save up to 50 links from the page that you give it. So if you give it the home page of a site, if the site is very simple, old-fashioned site, which just has all of its links from the main page, or if you give it a sitemap, then it can archive up to 50 of those. There are more advanced methods for ensuring that you get everything. If we have time, I will bore everyone with details. and anecdotes.
We'll just give you another minute or two to preserve your page. And it's worth noting that although we do both love the Wayback Machine, there are other ways to archive things. And once you do start exploring and looking into it, it becomes, we'll discuss this a bit more later, but it becomes quite a powerful network. So one thing we would like to emphasize is, although we're showing you one of the main ones, and that by their very nature, big things attract more things, you know, they have a gravitational pull. It's always worth exploring the small areas, the niche spaces, especially when we go to talk about things like fair and care, where sometimes the larger spaces are not built around the same kind of values and principles that you might prefer. So just another minute, maybe.
And I love Ken's example.
Yeah, I
Apart from
pushed
the
the
fact-
archive button myself, Chris, back then. And I find this really fascinating. I don't remember viewing this in the last decade, but looking back on me as a young professor, and you know, rules and regulations, and this is format that I had to follow back then, but you know, I was not at all accepting of late assignments, and I do remember that. And now I'm super, super flexible. In fact, other colleagues get upset at me for being so flexible, but I've changed over the years. But it's
the
interesting to go back in
cringe,
time and see what I did over 20 years ago.
the
And I
cringe in
myself did
one's
push the button to make it archived. And you can also, it's also possible to ask them to remove archives.
yeah,
There's that's involved as well.
yeah. You can, yeah, so you don't need a Wayback account to archive something. If you create one, it's free. Then it gives you extra options. I was just going to say to Ken, the cringe looking back at your younger self is a sign of
Oh,
how
yeah.
far you've come. Ooh, there we go.
Oh, and teaching my students to write web pages in the mid 1990s in HTML using a text editor. I remember those days as well.
Love it.
So Beatrice looks like she's run into an issue where it's recognizing it not as a web page, it might be as an image on the Wayback Machine. Some of this will have to do with
No, this is good.
Yeah.
So click save page, and
Yeah.
then it will save it. The only thing it's saying sign in is just if you want to add
There you go.
additional things like send you an email of the results and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
Yeah, I
you can
get
use
it.
it completely anonymously.
Okay, thank you.
Which is important,
Yes.
we think, because I think we'd both like to assert that archiving is not a neutral act. Nothing is neutral, really. But historically, we've enjoyed the pretense that libraries and museums and other preservers of things act neutrally. And I think one of the most important things that's come across in the last 20 years is how ridiculous that is. And how every act should be a deliberate one. And if it's not, you should be asking yourself, why are you just doing this as if it doesn't matter? Because
Yeah.
it should. Right. Well, while you were exploring, was there anything you wanted to add about preserving something? What did everyone decide to try and preserve?
Actually, there's one I'm going to try to reserve. I
Oh.
was you got me down a path, Jenny, and now I'm not paying enough attention. But a friend of mine, I lost a friend of mine. It'll be 25 years ago this August 4th, and his mother created a memorial site for him. And it's kind of bit rotting a little bit, to use a word that our friend Alan Naveen uses sometimes. That I don't think the HTTPS certificate's working anymore, and that can create issues. And I've archived it myself locally, but I'm going to actually go check that it's archived. And if not, I'm going to make sure it's archived.
No, that's amazing. And Maha preserved the MYFest site, which of course.
Oh, of course.
I can't believe it didn't occur to me and Chris while we were building the session to use that as our example. And then one of the things that is in the blog post but we didn't mention is it will tell you the last time if something was archived. And that is always a really interesting conversation to have with yourself. Like, does it need doing again? How long ago was it? Who was it? And I think that those are the kind of discussions that we're going to talk about if you move into teaching around this. That drawing that sort of awareness out with your students, which is that, you know, something was preserved once, it may change, and then it may be preserved again, but it also may change because our opinions of it have changed. And that's one thing that I think is really quite interesting and important. Oh, you've got your floating thing back, Chris. It's gone now, though. Well done.
Is it gone?
Nearly there. Things are slowly disappearing.
It looks good.
Okay.
It looks good.
Yeah.
Okay, so A quick note on preservation and teaching practice. There is lots more resource in the blog post and linked out in another blog post on how we can link this to teaching. We will just say for now that we think that learning and reflection and action should be all together, as Freire says, and we want to kind of suggest something further, that maybe we can engage in web archiving as praxis. So maybe, you know, when we looked in that first section about what is archiving and had some excellent contributions from all of you on what archiving can mean and who does it and who controls it and things about decentralization and reliance. Well, maybe we can archive directed at structures to be transformed. So, and maybe we can build that into our teaching and learning. So Jenny and I kind of suggest that archiving should be a verb and preservation should be a verb, and that we need to think critically when we're preserving things and engaging with preserved things. So where does it come from? Who preserved it? Or why am I preserving it? How has it been preserved? Where has it been preserved? So, you know, we mentioned in the post, if you want to read it after the session, that the Internet Archive has recently been made an official US government data repository. Now that sounds like it could be a good thing, but then looking at what's been happening to US government data recently could be a very, very bad thing. And that, you know, brings up that point about reliance on single systems. So yes, all of these critical questions are important when we're engaging in web archiving. You know, what is the future of this this archive? Who might it help in the future, or might it have any ill effects for anyone in the future? So we feel that preservation is a nice metaphor for praxis, and the next section, which I think Jenny is going to lead, kind of gets us deeper into that.
So Chris and I spend so much time talking about teaching and learning and everything around it. But one of the things we speak about the most is how important it is to hear everyone, everyone in the room, everyone in the conversation. If you're thinking about preserving something, everyone whose voices were set down or recorded or whatever, in whatever way, you know, we put their thoughts to paper or to sort of some kind of digital element. And one of the other things we think about then is this idea of a choral explanation. So this is coined by Mike Caulfield, who I'm sure quite a few people in MYFest are familiar with. But we think about it, thinking about many sort of different explanations from different perspectives, which allow us to more deeply understand a topic. And when it comes to preservation, there are two aspects of this. There's first the idea that you must preserve as many perspectives or as many iterations of a thing as possible, so that what you don't only do is preserve the dominant voice, the government perspective, you know, that one theory that everyone is speaking about, but that you also actively look for the quieter voices and perhaps those who are less supported by the status quo. But in addition to that, we want people to think about how different this is. So if you listen to a single explanation, it's almost akin to that idea of the banking model from Freire, right? It is one thing that is the truth being transmitted as the truth to a group of people who are meant to hear the truth and then continue repeating that truth. What we'd like to assert is that preservation and archiving, and digital archiving specifically, especially now, can be an act of choral preservation, so that we leave for the future, right, not the truth, but what we were. And that when those who look at it later reflect on it and use it and analyze it and engage with it, what they get then is not this kind of dominant shaped model, not this dominant idea, but an actual snapshot, right, as is often used on the web, an actual snapshot of what was going on and the discussion that is happening. So for us, choral preservation is the way to go. And when you have more time, Chris has managed to remix one of my very, very, very favorite things, which is Ali Broche hyperbole and a half's all the things image, which for those of you who are old enough to remember, was a little line drawing of a very angry tiny person with a very funny haircut, holding a broom. And she at that point was wanted to clean all the things. And what we're assorting is to archive all the things. And that doesn't mean archive everything. It means when you do archive something, you look at all of its aspects, right? Because the other thing, of course, we're asserting is that there needs to be a deliberate element to it. So archives aren't neutral, they're entwined with the structures we want to challenge. So if the idea is that we're going back to Ferry again, that we can take praxis and use it to challenge and almost dismantle those dominant structures, then we have to have as many voices involved as possible. So what we're going to ask you to do now is think about two things, and then we're just going to have a chat, really. We're going to think about FAIR and CARE, and there's nothing higher education loves more than an acronym. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that really has most to do with, although not entirely to do with, data. So the idea is that your data is findable, accessible, usable by many different things, and that it can be reused by others where appropriate. However, although FAIR is one of those things that a lot of people are picking up, especially at least in the UK, in sort of what we would term research intensive universities, we'd like to assert that you can't actually do that without CARE. And CARE stands for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. Because in FAIR, it's just about the data, right? It acts as if you do these 4 things and then you've done your job and you've preserved what needs preserving and you've done it for the purpose of other people using it. And therefore, that's fine. But what we think is that's actually not enough. So when you're looking at using something, of course, you want it to be usable later. It needs to be interoperable and reusable, but actually you need to ask yourself some critical questions, right? What is the collective benefit? Who is in charge of it? Who's responsible for it? And is ethical to do so? And so what we'd like to do right now is just give everyone a moment for 2 things. We have another comment stream because we deeply love that tool. And also we have a chance here to have a chat. But what I'm going to do before we do that is scroll up in the comment section, which is going like gangbusters, and just read out some of that as well. So we've got, first of all, Ken noting for us that the links don't always work in the Wayback Machine, but sometimes you can find set page URLs. So if you're thinking about preserving a whole web page, sometimes you have to do a bit of digging to make it work for you. And that's actually important to note. It goes back to our reflection that when we automate something and you lose that connection to it, you can make assumptions about what does and doesn't work or whether or not it's serving its purpose that aren't present necessarily if you're actively engaged with it. John was noting that they want to see if they can Wayback and capture the blue sky count. I agree with them. I think does struggle a bit with things that can just sort of keep updating constantly, and that should make us question, like, is a snapshot the right way to archive that? Is preservation of blue sky the same as writing everything down? I don't know about everyone else here, but I, like Chris, downloaded all of my tweets a few years ago when it became clear I would never go back, or not very often, and that was a huge number of gigs of things I'd said over the years, but I'm not sure if having every one of them written down is exactly what we want. And then finally, people are noting that we've done things with things like Web Recorder. We've done things around looking back at how the internet was different before there was a load of AI generated stuff. I noted that for Chris and I, this kind of conversation is essential for the conversations around generative AI, because you have to be deliberate and what happens when you lose that connection to what you might preserve sort of inside of it. So we're going to ask you to take about 3 minutes now. We'd like you to contribute your voices. Chris is smiling because it's a prime number and that's what I've given you. We'd like you to contribute your voices either in the comment stream or in the chat, or if you're still walking in the forest and you want to join us orally, just let us know. What does it mean when we get together and archive something? What kind of additional meaning does it bring to that experience? What does it mean to think of an act of archiving not as a neutral snapshot, right, but as an act of preservation of a voice, and then possibly that voice through your voice, right? And what happens when you start thinking about it that way? So we'll give you 3 minutes from now, so until 47 past the hour, and then we'll come back and have another chat. Is there anything I missed, Chris?
No, I was just going to say it's section 4 in the blog post,
Yes.
and it's the comment stream, or if you go to section 5, it's just above the start of section 5.
All right, I will pause up again at this point.
I was about to say, there we go.
So yeah, just picking up on a point around the impossible task of trying to archive everything. When the Internet Archive started, its mission was to archive the internet, and that soon became impossible. So it's now has to be necessarily focused by whoever is there and elsewhere, and whoever else is archiving things as to what goes on it. And we've also had points about kind of inaccessibility of old web pages, maybe not working properly on new equipment. That's a big issue. You know, the Internet Archive does its best, but you know, the entire internet is a very diverse place. And yet the other point, Wikipedia, you know, it's possible that in September in the UK, Wikipedia could be blocked because they have said that they will not adhere to the UK's new Internet Safety Act guidance, requiring people to produce ID to access certain websites in certain ways. So it might be blocked. So we might need to download it or find an archive of it in the UK at least.
And that goes then, I guess, to the next thing we wanted to talk about. So there's an idea that we have that others have had, because it turns out there's a whole poem with this as title, which we're really excited to find. And it's not a new idea, but we wanted to talk a bit at the very end of the session about preservation as resistance, both as an act of resistance by preserving something that is in danger or is in fact dangerous to those in power, from those in power, or to those in power, but also through collective and careful and critical acts of preservation that become acts of daily life. And I think it's really important for us to consider a few things there. First of all, is that it's one of those things, just like making pickles, that you can do as long as you have the element and the jar. So you've all tried today, or if you've not been with us today, you can try using the blog post, preserving your own, a web page that you selected. You've looked at other things that other people have preserved. It is something you can literally do in 5 minutes each day if you want to. And I think it's really important to note just how easy it is that way. The other thing, though, is this idea around preservation as resistance and learning, and what we ask our students to carry forward with them. And Chris and I would like to assert that when we learn together in a community, we're not only preserving what we already knew, right? The cultural understanding, the significant amounts of knowledge that we already have sort of as humanity, but we're also preserving that moment in time when we created something new, right? So if we're all collectively deliberately engaging with what has already occurred and what we already understand, and then we're careful about preserving what happens in that moment, what you build then is both deliberate and inclusive in ways that our sort of current structures are not. And John's noting that they think we get caught up in storage as a paradigm for preservation for digital works and politically endangered ones. It is a poor one, absolutely, and perhaps it's certainly not sufficient. And then he goes on to say other more performative preservation paradigms can be more resilient. Yes, absolutely that. And so I wanted to hand over to Chris to talk about two things. The first of them is this the preservation of the signs happening in the US. And then maybe briefly, if you don't mind, the collective distributed preservation of some of the archives.
Yes. So again, go away bar. So we talked about the Internet Archive. It's great, but it calls itself the Internet Archive, but anything singular is a risk. So we're kind of thinking about maybe what we need is many Internet archives, maybe our Internet Archive. So the first example that Jenny mentions is Save Our Signs. We've scrolled too far down. So you may or may not know that because Trump, certain signs in national parks, which provide information, historical information, some of it uncomfortable, in the United States of America, are going to be removed or censored. And there's a community initiative which we consider to be an act of choral preservation in praxis, called Save Our Signs. I recommend having a look at it because it's a great effort. They are individuals taking photographs of signs in national parks, which may soon be removed or censored, and sharing them through Save Our Signs website so that everyone can see them, maybe preserving them for the future, and maybe learning from them and learning from the act of preserving them as they go. So we think this is a nice example, but we've also mentioned, you know, an internet archive or many internet archives is better than one internet archive. Others are available, but one thing which I've come across more recently is something called PSYOP, which is an aim to create a distributed peer-to-peer internet archive using technology that we have already. So it's actually using BitTorrent, which is often associated with piracy, but that's not its only purpose, and certainly not what it was developed for, into a peer-to-peer system to distribute data, culture, and knowledge. So we think this is a really interesting one, and maybe it is going some way towards the point I think we had in the first comment stream about reliance on one organization, and maybe it doesn't fully solve the storage problem, but you know, maybe it's a step in the right direction.
And so we wanted to just wrap up, as we have the 5 minutes, for hopefully having everyone having thought of the different ways that we sort of approach and consider preservation, saving, and what it means to do that actively and daily, you know, if you can engage with that way. And then this idea then of using what you have to do what you need, and not getting too complicated or complex, remembering that the Wayback Machine may be slow but does the job, and that in other cases, other things like BitTorrent may be useful in ways that we haven't explored yet. So in a lot of ways, preservation can be an act of sort of creation and innovation, and we would like you to sort of walk away having considered that. Other than that, we want to thank you very, very much for your time. And I wanted to note John's comment at the end about liking the idea of peer-to-peer preservation, but of course it doesn't solve the problem of storage not being the same. And again, looking at indigenous models to digital preservation, we actually have, or I have, I don't know if Chris has, that book, John, because we do want to incorporate that. And Chris and I actually teach something around open knowledge where preservation comes up. So we wanted to emphasize that as well. But just to thank you all for your time, encourage you to come back and look at the blog post again and see what other people have said, because it preserves your comments now, but also anything you want to say later. And just say thank you again to MYFest and everyone who puts this together, because we had the best time thinking about this and putting this session together. Is there anything, Chris?
No, thank you so much, everyone. It's been great taking part in it. And get in touch. All our contact details you probably have already, but they're on the blog post as well.
Yeah, you can always find us.
Chris, I will be hitting you up about preserving social media sites. I think it's a big challenge. I'd love to hear your tricks.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, he's an absolute master.
And I will add thank you to both Chris, Jenny, and thanks for everyone contributing. I put the link in again. We dropped it a few times. Please give feedback on this session as well as any other sessions. The link's there in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Beatrice. Just had a good time. But yeah, that's us. It's nearly 4. We'll hang out, of course, but in the spirit of MYFest, we also want to give you time and space if you need to take a breath or take a walk, or come back in out of the forest. Other than that, we'll be around, and you can find us both on the Discord, can't you, Chris?
It's another session coming up in an hour for those who would like to come back in an hour. I'll be hosting, and then another one in a couple hours that Jenny will be helping to host as well. Yes. It's a busy day today in MYFest.
Thanks.
Thank you all, and I will stop the recording.